For as long as I can remember, I've always been interested in martial arts. I think it might have started with the Karate Kid as a child and extended onwards with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles into the 90s, and all those other cheesy franchise movies and sitcoms and cartoons that had something to do with martial arts, karate, or whatever else. I remember wanting to take karate classes as a child, but my mom wasn't really into the idea, and she preferred that I'd stayed in Boy Scouts and did other things with my extracurricular time. My dad wasn't really keen on it either because he thought it might turn us into a bully or into one of the other neighborhood kids that took karate and had a chip on their shoulder about it. It wasn't until I was 20 and I moved out of my mom's house and I started taking Aikido classes at a dojo. I chose Aikido because I was really keen on the philosophy of Aikido. Aikido translates to the way of harmony in Japanese. Morihei Ueshiba is the founder of Aikido, and he is known as O-sensei to Aikido students, which means great teacher. And Morihei Ueshiba is a very curious character. He came up a little bit underneath 5 feet in height, but had such a way with the transference of energy and with joint locks, arm locks, wrist locks, various pressure points in the body, and had a way with the way movement happened and the way the energy flowed when two parties come in contact with each other. And he knew exactly how to pull the right moment and push at the right moment in order to achieve the desired result in defending himself. If you're new to my channel, you have to know what I'm doing. Right now I'm at work during a 16-hour shift taking a break. I'm using the treadmill in the basement. I made a promise to myself and my viewers I would post every single day here on YouTube. It's supposed to be a tracking of my progress as a content creator and also a demonstration to other aspiring content creators of what it must be like to post every single day. So Morihei Ueshiba developed Aikido techniques through a number of different judo techniques and other forms of martial arts he picked up along the way in his lifetime, and formed Aikido, which was something that anyone could use to defend themselves, no matter how big or small they are, against even a much larger opponent. If they knew about the technique and how to execute the technique properly, they can do it in a harmonious way and render not only themselves unharmed, but also their attacker unharmed. Some people call it the gentleman's martial art for that reason, where they can handle a conflict without actually having to deal any violence to the attacker themselves. Just neutralize the attack and then get them in a point of submission on the ground where you can talk things through or wait till the authorities arrive to arrest them. So I really like the idea of taking Aikido classes, and I have to admit that even Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop played a role in my desire to wanting to learn Aikido techniques properly. I was looking all over the area I grew up where I could take Aikido classes specifically. I wanted traditional Aikido because I wanted to learn the essence of what that particular martial art was all about. I finally found one location, and the teacher that taught there taught their own version of martial arts called Budo Rokukai. Budo Rokukai was a mixture of karate, Aikido, Judo, and I think Wing Chun. And this was a martial art that the owner of the dojo came up with, Sensei Nikura, once again. A very wonderful sensei, very modest, very humble, and also very knowledgeable and respectable teacher. But the thing was that Sensei Nikura didn't teach Aikido, he taught Budo Rokukai, and I was interested in Aikido as a purist kind of thing. Like I wanted to learn the essence of Aikido, the way of harmony, and something that was close to the traditional branch of what Aikido is. And his students would argue, and as well as he would argue, that you don't just want to learn Aikido only or karate only. What you want to do is get many different types of martial arts techniques and find out what works for the individual. Which more or less, oddly enough, leads me to another martial art that I'm very fond of, which is the only true martial art, known as JEET Kune Do, which is the martial art that Bruce Lee came up with, the way of the intercepting fist. And JEET Kune Do has a philosophy of finding what works for the individual and using that, finding what actually works in a real life martial arts situation and works for your body type, works for your strength level, works for your flexibility, and so on and so forth. So as a result, Sensei Nikura was not teaching just Aikido. However, he had another student in his class who went by the name of Brian. Brian was also a patrolman or a police officer in that area. And Brian one day, after training with Sensei Nikura for a while, Brian one day challenged his sensei to a duel inside the dojo. Ooh. And Brian was a black belt at that point, I think in karate and a number of other martial arts. But Brian was also very much interested in teaching traditional Aikido classes also. So in this challenge, they had a match, and then Brian came out on top in the match. And he says he bowed to Sensei Nikura and said, "Thank you for the flower I have blossomed into. or something to that effect. I can't remember the exact story, it was over 12 years ago. But the point is that it caused kind of a rift between the students of this dojo, where Sensei Nakura taught Budo Rokukai and Patrolman Brian was teaching traditional Aikido, which was kind of strange because Sensei Brian didn't necessarily know the real traditional roots of Aikido outside of books he read and things he saw on the internet, while Sensei Nakura knew more about the traditional aspects of Aikido, except he chose not to teach them. He chose to teach something that he thought was more effective for real-life fighting scenarios. On the other hand, Patrolman Brian had real-life in-the-street fighting experience as a police officer, and he said that Aikido is more than sufficient in being able to nullify attacks and deal with hostile aggressors. So it creates this rift amongst all the students, and half the students go to one class and the other half the students go to the other class, training underneath their respective teachers. So me, I come to this dojo as an outsider, not knowing about all this drama, and I see the two classes. In Sensei Nakura's class, there's lots of slow progressive applying the technique, using the technique, and then discovering how it works. So both parties, the attacker and the receiver, know how to make sure they can apply the technique in a way that's safe for both people. I thought this was really wonderful because I wanted to learn the techniques and the philosophy behind Aikido without actually getting injured or hurt. And then inside Brian the Patrolman's class, he was teaching what he claimed was traditional Aikido. And they had this whole ritual when they started each class where they sat in a certain way with their feet folded over on top of each other in a certain way, and they would breathe in and out, and then when he gave the high sign, everyone would clap 3 times in front of them, which apparently I heard from other students is actually something you do at a funeral and not something you do at the beginning of a martial arts dojo practice thing. So I suppose there may have been some mistakes in Brian's translation or interpretation of what constitutes an effective traditional Aikido class. But anyways, they would do their classes in this certain way, and their classes relied on actual punches, actual kicks, and actual strikes. Like full speed, full force, and you have to learn, sink or swim kind of thing. And I also had a lot of appreciation and respect for Brian's style. It's like, you learn. You're gonna learn to deal with that punch and be ready for it. You're not gonna learn how to be ready for that punch unless you confront that fear, I think was the philosophy. And you can also see the students in the class not really wanting to fully punch with everything at risk of hurting someone who was newer in the class, such as myself. So they did go easy on the new guy when I eventually took that class, but I'm skipping ahead already. So I took Sensei Nakura's Budo Rokukai classes for once or twice a week for several weeks back in my early 20s when I first moved out of my mom's house. And I was very, very skinny, and it kicked the living crap out of my body. It was so intensive, all these exercises we had to do, sparring drills we had to do, we had to employ certain techniques on each other, learn how to do hip throws, learn how to fall down properly. We had to learn how to roll out of techniques, and so on and so forth. It was pretty intense, and I was out of shape, skinny, burnout kid right after high school who was working a service industry job and just trying to learn some martial arts, you know? So I watched those classes, participated in those classes, I liked them a lot, and then I was invited. I would stay after my class to watch the next class, which was Brian's class, because I was intrigued by it. I wanted to learn more about raw Aikido. So I was sitting there, I was watching the class, and a couple other students asked me, like, why are you watching this? Why are you still here? And I was like, well, I'm interested in Aikido. And from what I understood, that the students between both teachers were at odds with each other and had a lot of criticism to give to one another about who's teaching real martial arts, and how Sensei Brian is disrespecting Sensei Nakura, and how Sensei Nakura feels like he has to give in to Brian teaching at his dojo, and that Brian is just full of ego and self-centered, even though he preaches don't have an ego and all of that sort of thing. And the funny part about this whole thing is that Aikido translates to the way of harmony. It's going with it. Don't fight the force as it comes in. Step aside, let the force go beside you and help it along. Let it keep going on its trajectory. If hate comes your way, step aside, let the hate pass you by. If a punch is coming towards you, you can try blocking, knocking out of the way, but it's a lot easier to just not be where the punch is about to land. So the philosophy is easy to utilize on paper, but when it comes to real life situation, sometimes you don't see the punch coming, and other times you can't move fast enough. Anyways, they invited me to one of the classes. Sensei Brian said, come on in my class and find out where your heart lies, is what he said. And Sensei Brian had a very strange way of interacting with people. Whenever he came in, he was wearing blue jeans and his leather biker jacket, and he would act a certain way. But when he got back out of the dressing room, he had his gi on and his hakama. Hakama are kind of like black, they look like black wide leg pants that you wear. They signify that you are a master of the art. It's kind of like a black belt in Aikido to wear hakama pants. I might be wrong, but at least in this particular dojo, with Brian's interpretation of what traditional Aikido was, this is what he was doing. Anyways, he came out of the dressing room and he walks up to the window and he looks out and he smiles just like this blank stare and points out the window. And then for some reason or other, a couple of his students came up and look at him like, "What is it, sensei?" You know, kind of like this really surreal, almost like this should be like a cheesy 80s movie kind of moment. And he goes, "Tree of happiness," and puts his hand down. And what he was doing was he was pointing at one of his students that was chatting up one of the ladies who goes to a dance studio just on the other side of the building. He was pointing to his student just saying, "Tree of happiness." I don't know what it means. I don't think his students knew what it means, but they were kind of like, "Oh, okay, yeah." They looked like, okay, this is a moment we're having with sensei kind of situation. Very bizarre. Patrolman Brian had these ice blue eyes that stared straight through you. He was very penetrating gaze, very confident man. He was probably 5'9", 5'10", maybe a $180 to 200 pounds. Very stocky, very muscular. A neck like as big as his skull. It was just like he was neck. He had just like this neck that attached to his shoulders with his head there. He just had this presence to him, I guess. And the way he was pointing out the window saying, "Tree of happiness," with all these people staring at him, and the way he conducted himself throughout the class was, I kind of felt like he was getting inspiration from maybe equal parts of Steven Seagal and Mr. Miyagi. And it was just really kind of hokey and uncomfortable. But I went with it though because I wanted to learn more about traditional Aikido. So I went through the class. It was rough, it was hard. The students went easy on me and I learned techniques. They employed them on me and I realized why certain Aikido techniques are so dang effective. And I learned that some of them aren't entirely effective and you can kind of get out of some of them if you knew what they were doing to you in advance. If you didn't know anything about Aikido and you go to grab someone and they put a technique on you, you might not see that coming and then all of a sudden you're on the ground if they're quick enough and if they know how to utilize that energy you gave them. But anyways, in this case, we're learning techniques. So the idea is to learn how to have it employed on you and why it works, so you can better employ it on someone else who is attacking you or grappling you. One of the exercises was you stood in the middle of the room and every student came towards you and did the same thing on you. Like they grabbed your wrist in the same way and you had to apply the technique and put them down to the ground. Apply the technique, put them down. Or every student would come up to you and do a karate chop down like this on top of your head. You had to step aside and guide them down to the ground and put them in an arm bar on the way down. Or every time they grab your lapel in the same area. So the idea of this wasn't to simulate a real-life fighting experience so much as to give you an opportunity to learn the technique with repetition over and over again on different people with different levels of flexibility. So there was wisdom to that, and I learned how to employ techniques a little better than I did before. Instead of just watching videos or reading books about Aikido, I was actually able to work with people who had more experience in Aikido than I would ever hope to. And I took his classes for a couple days. On the third day of class, I think he wanted to make an example of me, more so than he already had. On the first couple days of class, he did call me out and wanted to use me as an example to demonstrate to me and showcase to me why and how Aikido works. And it was always uncomfortable when he did it too, because anytime he stood up and he spoke, all the students instinctively just dropped to the ground into a kneeling position. Like he was like, oh, the one we have to listen to. And I followed suit because I'm here to learn from the teacher. If this is how class is conducted, I'm going to behave appropriately and politely and abide by the rules and the culture of this particular environment. But it was so cheesy feeling though, it felt so artificial, and it was all about him and his ego. Which is funny once again because he was preaching egolessness. So he took all these opportunities to demonstrate to me how Aikido was true and how it worked, and I was already sold on it. I was there because I wanted to learn traditional Aikido. So a couple days passed and things are just kind of like the same thing, but the third day was really peculiar because he wanted to engage with me one-on-one more. So after he comes up and he grabs me, I put the technique on the instructor, he gets out of it and he goes, nope, you didn't do it good enough. He was trying to challenge me to level up and get better at it. So I would do the technique and then make it work, and he said that very good. And then we'd switch it around, so I'd have to go attack him, and then he would put the technique on me, and I would try to get out of it. And when I tried to get out of it, he's like, oh, okay, we got a challenge here. And he felt like this was a challenge for some reason. When he was encouraging me, he's like, don't just give me the technique, no, resist. And he kept encouraging me to resist, which is funny once again because Aikido is the way of harmony. But at the same time, we have to make sure the techniques are being employed correctly. So it comes down to this. We're doing this technique. I get lucky and slip out of one he's trying to put on me. And he goes, okay, what are you going to do now? You got to take me down. And he kind of put me on the spot. I didn't know what to do. Like, well, what are you going to do if this is a real life situation? You got out of it, but now what are you going to do? And I'm just going to come at you again. He comes at me again, and I have to do the technique again. You're going to have to do better than that. And then he kept challenging me to like take him down. I had to take my instructor down, who has maybe like 100 pounds on me at the time. I'm like 140. He's got about 80 pounds, 60 to 80 pounds on me. Big guy, stocky. So the only thing that came to mind about me being able to take him down is by getting him into a headlock and sticking my legs out and dispersing my weight. Because I'm so light, he could just flail me around like a rag doll. I had to be able to use my weight to my advantage and disperse my weight and widen it out to make it more difficult for him to fling me around. So he comes into me, he puts a technique on me, I reverse it, get out of it by luck. I got lucky. I'm not very, very skilled at martial arts. I got lucky in this particular instance. And I got him into a headlock, and I went around, I grabbed my shoulder, and I grabbed right here, and his head was inside this region right here of this headlock I had. And I was just holding on for dear life, and I kicked my leg out to the side to make it more difficult for him to flail me around. And sure as heck, he flailed me around, and it felt like forever doing this. And he was just flipping around, and it got to a point where he stopped moving for a couple seconds and flipped around a lot more. And then all of a sudden, I felt heat and moisture on my arm right here. And then I felt his teeth sink into my forearm. He bit me. He bit me and he drew blood. At the same time too, all of his struggling from his neck rubbing against the inside of my gi caused his neck to start bleeding. I think he had some skin tags or a mole or something that ripped off in the struggle. And the crazy part about all this was that he was encouraging me to do this behavior and to do this inside the dojo. I let go of him, I said, "That's a bite," and I stepped back away from him. And then he charged at me full force. He tackled me at the waist, knocked me down to the ground, sat me down on the ground, pinned my arms down with one hand, and got in my face and said, "What are you gonna do now? What are you gonna do now? You're dead, you're dead. You got nothing, you got nothing. You're just gonna give up, huh? You're just giving up?" And it was scary. It was one of the most scary experiences in my life. This big guy, a police officer of the law, my sensei in martial arts, who's coming off as very egoless and full of grace and harmony, all of a sudden going crazy on me after challenging me to do all these things. Surreal experience, absolutely nuts. So I stuck it out for the rest of the class. I stayed in class, and every 5 minutes, 10 minutes for the rest of the class, which was another 45 minutes long, he kept saying things, and everyone got down to the ground on their knees like they do around sensei, and he would say something that justified what he did. Something like, "In a real martial arts situation, you should not put your arms or your fingers near the enemy's mouth, because that is how you can lose a digit very quickly. That is all." And then everyone come back up and start practicing again. Then he would say something else, and everyone get down on the ground, and he would say something else that would justify his behavior and how he just treated this new student in the dojo that was clearly out of bounds, not proper whatsoever, outside of the spirit of Aikido, and against what he was teaching everyone. I sat through the rest of the class, I did the techniques, but I opted out of challenging him, and I just was like, "Nope, no, you win, you're right." At the end of the class, he went back into the dressing room. A couple other students said, "No one's done that like that before. That's really, really wild. I don't know what we don't know what this means." They were saying, they're like, "You were wrestling for like over a minute and a half," they said. They were watching the clock. I don't know if you've been in a fight before, but 90 seconds is a long time to be in a ground fight. Locked and just strength against strength, getting flailed around, and it was probably the longest 90 seconds of my life. It felt more like 5 or 10 minutes long with how intense this was. This guy is like a bull, very, very thick, stocky, and I'm just this rag doll of a young man who just got done being a teenager a couple years earlier, living on a diet of nothing, a bunch of water and just skin and bone, no muscle at all. Anyways, he comes out from the back room. He's got his jeans on, he's got his leather chaps on, he's got his leather jacket on, he's got his shaven head, his ice blue eyes. He says, "I respect you because you train with your heart and not with your ego. I invite you to come out with me and the rest of the students tonight for a drink at the bar." And I just said, "No, thank you. I think I should just go home and maybe take a bath with some Epsom salts or something, because I'm pretty sore and I need to make sense of this, you know." I didn't know if that would be disrespectful or not, so I didn't know how to handle the situation, so I just stopped going back to the dojo. I never went back to the dojo. I never talked to Sensei Nakura, which I probably should have. He should probably know what's going on inside the dojo with Brian, but I just walked away from it, and I was turned off to going back to that dojo ever again. Needless to say, I was sore from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet for the next 3 or 4 days, just absolutely sore, just lying around. I couldn't move. I gave that class the absolute best that I had, and I gave Sensei Brian the best I had in a fight, and I got lucky for a brief moment. It obviously bruised the guy's ego and his pride. He's supposed to be the alpha in the room teaching students and has a point to prove all the time about what he's doing and why he's doing it. Every action he's doing is supposed to demonstrate some sort of higher value and wisdom, and it was just all BS in my opinion. Looking back at it, this guy was obviously just wrong in the head. So with all that being considered, I still absolutely love Aikido as a philosophy and as a martial art, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. The idea of being able to end a conflict in the path of least resistance, using the force that's already there and redirecting it, and to render your attacker unharmed. I think that's the pinnacle of ending an argument, is being able to just neutralize the threat, neutralize the violence, neutralize the force, and ground it and de-escalate. That's the best way to handle any sort of argument. Whether it's verbal, whether it's physical, the philosophy is a beautiful thing. Every single Sunday I teach another circus and flow arts tutorial here on my YouTube channel. So if you want to learn how to juggle clubs, or contact juggle, the art of rolling spheres around your body in a mystical, magical way, or if you want to learn how to spin things in your finger, we call that bediddling in the industry. You can do it with ring binders, with flat pillows, with server trays like seen there. It's pretty cool. It's a fun little skill to have. Or you can learn how to do the devil sticks. The devil sticks are a circus and flow arts prop that I'm very familiar with, that I've been doing longer than any of the other circus and flow art props that I teach here on my channel. All you gotta do if you're interested in learning any of those things and much more is check out my playlist section here on my channel and click on the Circus and Flow Arts Basics link, or even my Contact Juggling Tutorials link to learn more about those things. And while you're there, you might as well check out the other playlists here on my channel. I've been organizing all of my chaotic postings in a way where it gives the viewers an opportunity to scroll through my content in a way that's a little more organized and less just scattered. And I think that's where we're drawing the line here tonight, folks. This is a very long video. Thanks for watching it all the way as far as you have. If you made it to the end, I really applaud you. This is a long one, and I know I drag on and on. So please remember, everyone, to never give up. Do your best. Stay true to who you are, and be amazing. Just be yourself. You'll be amazing. Thanks for watching. Good night.